All right, you guys, what's going on? We are back again for another video here. Captain Cody Davis with you guys as always. I think something's going on with my camera here. My picture looks a little bit fuzzy and my lighting's a little bit off, but we are going to roll with it either way. And what this video is going to be is actually we're actually going to revisit one of the first videos I ever posted here on my YouTube channel. And the reason we're going to go back and talk about this is because I think it's it's a good piece of information. It's a very helpful video. B, you can never really make the same video twice because us as anglers are constantly, hopefully improving, but we're definitely changing and changing things up in our techniques and presentations along the way. And also the main reason is because I've been getting a lot of questions regarding this via social media and people, customers on my boat and things like that. And in a roundabout way, the main question is, if you only had one bait to fish Lake Okeechobee with, what would it be? What's the best lure to use to learn Lake Okeechobee if you only had one? There's all different versions of this question, but it all kind of stems down to the same thing. And what I tell people is, if I only had one lure and one lure only to fish Lake Okeechobee with 365, it would be this guy right here. As specific as you want to get, I'd say it'd be a swim jig of some sort or of a certain color or whatnot, but specifically for me, it would be a 1/2 ounce black and blue swim jig. Now, I know a lot of people, the most common answer is most people are probably thinking of is like a Senko style bait, or a swimming worm or a speed worm style bait, like a burner worm or a zoom speed worm or some kind of cutter worm, things like that, which those are great picks as well. But I'm going to kind of dive into why I think this is the bait to have that you can, fish with 365 days out of the year. Jumping back to just generically talking about a swim jig, I tell people, if you have confidence in a swim jig, now that's the main thing. There's no point in throwing this bait if you don't have confidence in it. But if you do, and you're new to Lake Okeechobee, you could literally go out with 3 swim jig rods, have a white one, some kind of bluegill patterned one, and a black and blue one, and that's it. That's really all you need, and you will catch fish. And that's the beauty of a swim jig. Depending on what color and trailer and size you're using, you can make a swim jig imitate so many different types of bait fish and every type of bait fish that you're going to find on Okeechobee and match the forage to the fish you're catching. And that's what's cool or different about Lake Okeechobee that I tell people is you could literally be on this grass line catching fish that are schooling, blowing up shad in boat trails or in the Kissimmee grass on the outside edge. Literally troll your boat 100 yards in or down or whatever it might be, and you're on a completely different group of fish that want nothing to do with shad now. Now these fish are focusing on brim or bluegill. And the beauty is, depending, like I said, how you switch up your presentation on a swim jig, you can match that forage perfectly. And that's what just makes it so efficient and makes it very, very versatile. But for me, if I only had like one color, one pattern that I could throw 365, like I said, or showed you already, it's going to be a black and blue 1/2 ounce swim jig. More specifically, we'll kind of just go over what this is. This is a 1/2 ounce black and blue Dirty Jigs No Jack swim jig. It's not a secret. I mean, this is probably, if not, in my opinion, the best grass swim jig on the market for a few reasons, but it's pretty much whatever. That's the standard down here on Okeechobee. There's some other good ones, but that's the deal in my opinion. Now, what I do, and does this really make a difference? I don't know. You could buy a black and blue swim jig out of the pack, no jack swim jig, and throw it and catch tons of fish on it. But again, we're always tweaking things, right? And something I got on years ago, and now I just really can't break the habit, is changing the skirt on this jig to a star flash skirt. Now, this one is in Junebug color, which is what I primarily throw, but I also have them in black and blue. And to be perfectly honest, I can't really say I prefer one over the other for the most part. The Junebug, I think, is something a tad bit different because 99% of the people are going to be throwing a black and blue patterned jig. But I don't think the fish tell a difference at all. I think they just see a dark silhouette and go for it. So a black and blue or a Junebug, or even if they made an all black one, I would throw it just the same. But the beauty about the Star Flash skirt is a couple things. One, it's got rounded strands, which do a few things. I believe they give that bait more bulk. You could see the flare on that swim jig, how those strands flare out. Whereas with standard jig skirt strands, they're flat. A big thing that I think happens is when you're swimming a swim jig through the grass, those strands will actually stick to the side of the bait, and it doesn't give your swim jig as much bulk. Now, there are times where I don't want as much bulk. Like maybe if they're feeding on little shad and I'm throwing a white one or something, and then I'll just throw it out of the pack. But for the most part, I do switch them to these Star Flash skirts. Mikey Balls got me on this years ago, and it's just something that I do. Like I said, you don't have to go through those extremes. I know plenty of people that catch a ton of fish on swim jigs that just open them up out of the pack. Dirty Jigs does a very good job at making a great skirt on their jig. So you can open it up out of the pack and you're good to go. That's just something I do. The other big thing, really probably the biggest thing for me also, is you can see they've got a sprayed laminate in there. You can see this one's beat up and probably, I don't know how many months old and been through a lot of water, but you could see that sparkle in that jig skirt there. And I don't know, it's just little details might get you a couple of extra bites. A lot of people think now that we're on Okeechobee, you're in the thick grass, and it's going to bog down. So why don't you throw a quarter or a 3/8 ounce jig? Couple of things. I truly believe, and you can throw a 3/8. I mean, you're talking a 3/8 versus a 3/8 versus a half ounce. It's not a big difference, but I think, especially with the black and blue color or dark silhouetted colored swim jig, that heavier jig is going to get just a little bit lower in the water column, and I feel like a lot of times you're going to catch your bigger fish on that. Why I pick this colored swim jig over all the other ones out there, if I had to pick, I truly think, and I've noticed, there's times where you're catching fish on a white one or a bluegill patterned one, and everyone around you is catching fish on it. But in my experience, I feel like I usually catch the bigger fish in that area on black and blue or a dark silhouetted, dark color jig. And I really think the reason for that is when you're talking about a fish that's over 6 pounds, it's a very smart fish. It's educated. It's smart. And I feel like a lot of times that when you reel a swim jig of this color by that fish, they're not getting a good look at it because it's such a dark profile. They're almost just more or less seeing a silhouette go by them. They can't get a good look at it, and that's what entices them to come up and eat it. Whereas if you're throwing maybe a bluegill style or a different colored jig, I feel like when it goes by them, they see it and maybe they get a really good look at it and they decide not to eat it. That might not be what it is at all. I don't know, but this thing is the deal for me, especially for catching some giant ones. So I always throw a half ounce. If you have confidence in a 3/8, go for it. But a half ounce swim jig is kind of the deal for me. Now, here's what makes it very versatile. Also, you could change up your trailers on these things and make them do different deals and fish them completely different. So probably the standard out here is some kind of small swim bait or swim bait style bait in general. This is a Gambler Little Easy. This is what I throw when it comes to a swim bait style bait as a trailer. This is the one I throw 99% of the time. And I'll switch up the color depending on what's going on. This is what we call ghost shad. You can see it's kind of a transparent bait fish style color, like a shad color or whatnot. It's very natural. It's transparent, translucent, I should say. And this is what I'll throw if I'm in kind of cleaner water where I'm on the fringe where it's like, I maybe should switch my color to more of a natural green pumpkin bluegill pattern as opposed to the black and blue style or dark style jig. But I'll throw like a more translucent natural trailer on there. As that water tends to get a little bit darker, I'll go to a true black and blue style trailer, or if I think I'm around a lot of spawning bluegill or brim, I might go to something like, with some orange in there. This is an easy vibe, the big Gambler Easy Vibe, which is a good trailer as well. And then a lot of times you switch the color up. This is the Little Easy. the main reason I like throwing this one 90% of the time is it's compact. You don't get a lot of short strikes. You don't have a lot of fish coming up and grabbing the tail of the swim bait. When you get the bite, you got them. They choke the whole thing. And I think it's just a good compact presentation with that, that bulk of that flare of that skirt. And it just falls down to that tail just barely sticking out behind the skirt. And it's just a good looking profile. But there's times where I'll go all the way up to the Big Easy, which this is a 3-inch trailer. I'll go all the way up to a 5.5-inch trailer. Give it bulk. They're looking for big prey. They're in there eating those big bluegill and things, and sometimes that's the ticket. You just got to play around with it. And like I said, that's what makes this swim jig so versatile. A lot of other times, I will throw a cross style bait, like these two right here. These may look very similar, but they do two completely different things. This is a Gambler burner craw, which has a much faster, craw kick to it as you're swimming it through the grass. If they want that bait zipping and moving real quick, this gives it a little bit of a bigger profile at the same time because you're hooking it on there sideways and whatnot. This is a good one. And then this is one made by Bruiser. This is called the Crazy Craw. This is more of a slower, bigger, craw style profile, if you will. This one doesn't have as fast of a kicking action. So a little bit slower deal, but this one has caught me a lot of big fish as well. The other cool thing that the craw style bait does is it enables you to float your bait a lot more. Whereas this is a thinner profile, which means your swim jig's going to want to ride lower in the water column. Whereas with a cross style bait, that wider profile, it tends to float it. So there's certain situations where those fish want the bait up, but they don't want it super fast. So if you want to slow your bait down but still keep it up in the water column, you can go to a cross style bait. And sometimes they just want that profile in general. Now I know a lot of people are going to say, well, why don't you just go to a quarter or a half ounce or a 3/8 ounce swim jig in that case to keep it floated? Another big reason that I like a half ounce is we're talking about Lake Okeechobee, and you guys know how bad the wind is here. The heavier bait enables you to be able to throw this thing into the wind, be more accurate, and if you have a crosswind, it doesn't skip your bait across the top of the water. The wind actually doesn't catch your braid and pull the bait out of the water. It'll actually, the bait will get in the water more, and you'll get more water time with the heavier jig. And one of the best things that can happen for a swim jig bite down here is wind. They love this bait. They'll eat it all the time, but if you have windy conditions, that is where this bait really excels. So I just standardly always throw a half ounce jig down here. Another cool thing as far as with a cross style bait is if you have this thing on your rod and you're throwing and winding through eelgrass, through Kissimmee grass, whatever it might be, and you come across a clump of reeds, there is nothing stopping you from flipping this just like you would a standard flipping jig. The no jack swim jig's got a gaff of a hook on it. I mean, you are not going to roll this thing, and that's probably my favorite part about it. And so even though I throw this on a 7/6 medium heavy rod, not a heavy, not an extra heavy, I throw it on a medium heavy rod, there's nothing stopping you from pitching this to some sparse cover just like you would a half ounce flipping jig. Especially if you've got this cross style bait, it's going to resemble a flipping jig just the same. You can't tell me a fish is going to give a damn or tell a difference. So I do that often. I've caught a lot of big fish pitching this thing because I'm just too lazy to bend down and put a plastic on my flipping rod or pull my jig rod out in general. And so that makes it very efficient. Another cool thing you could do with this also, and this has happened to me a ton of times too, is I'll run into a scenario where I'm fishing submerged vegetation around people that are throwing a chatterbait, where people are ripping the chatterbait out of, when we had hydrilla, peppergrass, eelgrass, what have you. There are times where I'll go behind them and just swim the swim jig through that grass right behind them, and I will pick up some extra bites doing that. It almost acts more like a finesse vibrating jig. Those fish are getting pounded by 20 or 30 boats in an area. They're getting conditioned to that vibration of that chatterbait coming through, and this is just more of a subtle presentation, and they come through and catch some really big fish on it as well. Probably the biggest reason why this is my go-to and my favorite thing is when you hook a fish on this, they do not come off. Your landing ratio for me with this particular jig on the setup I throw it on is as close to 100% as you're going to get. And that I hope I don't want to come. I don't want that to come across as sounding arrogant or anything. It has really nothing to do with my abilities as a fisherman. It's just they get it, and they are pinned. Again, like I said, I throw this on 65-pound braid. You can throw it on 50. You could throw it on 40 if you really wanted to. But again, I think the 65, you're just not going to break it. You got the confidence where it's not going to break. A lot of times it helps you float that bait. Again, 65-pound braid is not very thin. It'll keep it floated. If you want to get down a little deeper, you might want to go to 50. I just throw 65. I haven't seen it where it's made that big of a difference. What that medium heavy rod does, and I think that's where a lot of people make a mistake with throwing a swim jig, is everyone thinks swim jig, heavy cover, swim jig, heavy cover. I need it on a heavy cover rod. I need it on a flipping rod. The thing about it is you need a rod with some tip. Now, you might want to throw a heavy action rod, depending on what brand of rod you use. Every line and brand of rod has different actions, and they call them different things. I flip fish a lot of the Arc stuff, and I like their medium heavy. And it's still pretty stout. It's a stout rod, the 7.6 heavy, medium heavy is, but it's got a bend and it's got a tip to it. And what that tip allows you to do is when that fish eats it, it allows it to load the rod and that fish to kind of turn away from you to really get the bait down in her crunchers before you pull into them. And the biggest thing with it is when you're reeling this thing, well, let me back up also. Something I talked to people about at ICAST, West Logan and stuff, people that fish swim jig all over the country. It's funny how you can go to 3 different lakes throughout the country, throw a swim jig and shake it through grass like this, and they come up and just shamu on it and you catch them. And you come to Lake Okeechobee and they will not touch it. Something about a long cast and a slow, just steady, consistent retrieve down here is the deal. Apparently, I don't have a lot of experience traveling, fishing for bass, so I'm not the one to talk about it. But talking to people that do it for a living all over the country, apparently that's not the way to do it at all. Anywhere that you need to shake that bait and move it, but something about that consistent, just that cadence coming through the grass of a slow, steady retrieve, or it could be a fast retrieve. It just needs to be consistent, is what drives these Okeechobee and Florida bass in general to biting. So you're constantly, usually you're just turning that handle, and you'll, with that medium heavy rod, you'll feel the bite. That line will jump, and you can continue to just reel into the fish, let the rod load. So when you pull into them, it's just all meat. There's no slack or anything like that, and you just get a good hookup. You keep that line tight and just bring them through the stuff, and they just don't come off. Especially with a big fish, 99% of the time you get them on this, it is in the crunchers. That's why when you guys, any of you that follow my channel, see I'm throwing a swim jig, that's why I'm able to boat swing everything, because they're just not going to come off. And I have confidence in that. Most other people you talk to do, and that's the safety or the confidence in the bait that, if you do get bit on this, you're not going to lose them. As much as I love catching them on a frog, and as much as I love catching them on a spook or a trap or whatever, there's always that, especially in a tournament situation. It's like, man, like you're always worried about them coming off, and if it does come off, you're going to start spinning out and things like that. Which with this, if I can make them eat this, especially in a tournament situation, this is the go-to, because you're not going to find a better landing ratio when it comes down to it. So if I had to pick one, this is it. A half ounce, some kind of a dark pattern swim jig. When I say a black and blue, for me, it's going to be a black and blue or a Junebug colored swim jig, but something dark. I just feel like, here's the other thing. I'll close on this for you. There's been a lot of situations where some dirty water and a lot of people are catching fish on white. I might only get 4 bites to their 10, but all of mine are going to be kicker fish. It just seems like the bigger fish like the darker profile, just something that they can't get a good look at. The other crazy thing, real quick, too, is for whatever reason, and this just comes from me having a ton of confidence in this bait and throwing it everywhere in the lake. I've caught a lot of big and just a lot of fish in general on this bait in places where they should not eat this, where I'm in crystal clear water, tannic, but crystal clear water in the lake, and where you should be throwing a more natural, like a green pumpkin color jig, and they still come up and eat this. So something about that darker silhouette just drives these fish crazy down here. Maybe it's the tannic color of our water. I'm not sure what it is, but big bites, lots of them, and your landing ratio is through the roof. So definitely give it a shot. If you don't fish a swim jig, it took me a while to get a lot of confidence in it, but now I'm never on the lake without my swim jig rod for sure. So again, this is a 1/2 ounce black and blue no jack dirty jig swim jig. You can change the skirt to a star flash skirt if you'd like, and kind of just play around with the trailers till you find something you like. Get out there and go fishing. So appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.